Some people have been reportedly hearing voices or sounds, at times even their name being called by different voices, sometimes female, sometimes male. And there was a pretty ardent question: what can that actually mean? Does it have any spiritual meaning? And, well, is there anything wrong with the specific person? While modern and, well, old psychology and psychiatry have always attributed hearing voices to madness, well, the point is, if someone wants to hide you a certain thing or a certain truth, there obviously has to be something beyond that. Because in a sick society, people won't call you crazy just for nothing. Because in a sick society, everyone is more or less kind of crazy. We all live in a sick society, so I guess we're all kind of crazy a bit in here. So the point is, when one hears voices, this doesn't necessarily have to be correlated with demons or, well, whatever religious form that people may have been induced in their minds. See, demons aren't necessarily those kinds of hordes of evil energies that seek to do harm. A demon is ultimately nothing else but a kind of energy that is not suitable for you. And in nature, there are so many of these simple manifestations, or somewhat even more complex um, manifestations. In forests, for example, you have some of the oldest populations everywhere in the world that talk about so called bad spirits of the woods. There are certain manifestations, entities. They are not corporeal, they don't have a physical body much, they are very subtle. They are physical by nature, but they are very subtle, and they do have certain effects. That is why they will probably always tell you not to do certain things at night. See, in many forests, especially the dense ones, it's not just the night predators that will be a possible problem to you. See, humanity has a huge potential. Humans each have the same amount of power, but it all depends on how willing they are to simply make use of that power, right? And one has to comprehend that demons, as you know, as they have been portrayed to you through the magical religious books, those aren't necessarily how demons necessarily look. From personal experience, I can tell that some demons are extremely weak. You will feel weakened around them because if you're extremely sensitive to things around you, you can feel some, let's call it gamer like, the power level of such beings, and it is almost like they can barely exist. When it comes to demons, obviously there are human spawns or entities created by humans out of pure rage, pure greed, and the such. You have to comprehend that when you go to school, English is a very occult language. It doesn't tell you that the first thing you learn in school is that you learn to spell, because each and every word has a certain influence, because ultimately it is nothing else but an energy that you put out. And in some cases, it is not just a simple energy, it is an energy to which you attribute a certain emotion. An energy to which you attribute your own emotion, aka your own life force, well, that is basically the two ingredients that you need to cast a spell, right? Now, even when you swear, typically you throw some kinds of demons through your mouth, but those kinds of energies usually are so volatile that they will simply dissipate. However, each and every action that you take throughout the day, at home, at your work, definitely leaves some of your energy as a signature in there. And very sensitive people can actually get in touch with that. Some can actually figure out where exactly to find you on this planet, or even in this galaxy, or in any corner of the cosmos. Such things are very possible. These psychic potentials are latent in most humans and active in some humans. In the end, occultism deals heavily with energy, and only with energy, how to manipulate it, how to make use of it, and things like that. When someone reaches a certain level of awareness and sensitivity, hearing voices is not something uncommon, but it's not necessarily something common as well. See, when your physical body, in its complexity, suffers certain kinds of damage, you can get in unconscious ways or in unwanted ways, you can get exposed to some forces. You have to comprehend in the realm of witchcraft, there will be forces or energy forms that will try to draw your attention. These drawings of your attention can be done because that energy form is either in a way unconscious, so it has certain abilities, certain knowledge about how you function and how to draw your attention so that it can infiltrate your system and do damage or whatever it has as a purpose to do, or that it is guided telepathically by some other being. In terms of witchcraft, such beings will typically haunt you, and well, they're not necessarily haunting you, they will be somewhere around. Now, in order to cast witchcraft on you, you need to accept that respective witchcraft, unless it is an attack. Some are deliberate, straightforward attacks, like you see, for example, in occultism. And occultism is no different from witchcraft. Some people call witchcraft positive and negative. Occultism is equally so, even if occultism is typically related to the negative part, right? Manipulating energies, attacking others from afar. There is literally no difference in between occultism and, well, witchcraft, right? Dark magic is nothing else but manipulation, right? Whether you call it dark occultism or whether you call it occultism, well, that's a bit wrong because occultism is much more than black energy, or whether you call it dark witchcraft, it's kind of the same and it only refers to the idea of manipulation. And it can stand from a lie, which is, well, apparently to you it looks like a simple lie, but it is much more complex than just that because it is said in such a way that it influences your system. It makes it reverberate in such a way that you will accept that lie easily. Some narcissists, some people like that, some fucked up personalities might actually end up using such occult techniques without actually knowing them. Because occultism doesn't mean you just manipulate energy. It means you are conscious of how energy functions and you will make use of certain techniques that will augment the manipulation of energy, right? Because you can send a curse to someone just by thinking about them and thinking of some event that will happen. Like, for example, when you worry about someone. Worrying is a very good emotion for a sick society because ultimately it is nothing else but imagination coupled with your own life force, with your own energy. Because what do you do when you worry about someone? You're thinking of all the possible outcomes that may hurt, maim, or probably worse, do to that person. They're not necessarily gonna happen, but you constantly thinking about that is like asking the universe for those things to happen, isn't it so? And you're not even thankful that those things don't happen. That worrying is exactly like casting a spell, a negative spell, let's call it so, on that person. Because you're envisioning a certain negative aspect and you're also using your own energy to constantly channel that. That is why a sick society constantly wants you obsessed with drama, because drama loves that. And when you use your own energy towards doing negative outcomes, you will attract upon yourself the worst possible types of karma. And that is why you see people who worry a lot, they usually have a very miserable life, because what you give is what you will receive. This is no such thing as manifestation laws and things like that. This is how karmic structures function and how the cosmos will return certain things back upon to you. Because technically, let's say you are manifesting those, although I don't like using that word because it is way too primitive for me. When it comes to such things as witchcraft, some people use certain energy forms that they will try to make use of from afar, or they will try to implant them somewhere in a person's life. And that person can end up hearing certain sounds, certain voices, especially if they are very sensitive. You've may probably heard those stories about the Appalachian Mountains that if you dare go into their forests at night, you might hear voices and things like that. I'm not sure if it is AI or not, but there are such places on the planet, especially around haunted places, because those haunted places have a lot of negative energies usually, especially if they are abandoned castles, places where wars have taken place, abandoned villages, places where people have died in mysterious occult ways or even in miserable ways because our ancestors have lived their entire life or most of their life in misery as well, and their emotions and the such are still probably wandering around. Yes, you're not going to find demons around there, you're going to find some remains of those people, right? Their hatred, their things like that. And when you open yourself to such energies, they don't know anything else but to do what they were designed, right? Their hatred can actually sting against you. And if you don't have a certain stability, it can actually cause you some damage. It can damage your auric field or things like that. With certain entities, if they have a certain potential, they can actually enter your system without your necessary wanting, and they can cause damage like that. Unconscious beings can actually do that. There are cases, for example, the Kailash lake or things like that. I've heard a few rumors about that. I don't know for sure, but things like this can actually happen, and they can actually cause damage to the human system because they might actually feel that they're trapped within your system once they enter. Don't forget, most of these beings, they do not have a discerning mind. They do not have a discriminatory mind. So they may feel unconsciously attracted to a certain human body, especially if they have a certain spiritual capacity, and they might actually feel trapped or they might actually cause damage. We're not going as far as possession, because possession happens in some cases. Unconscious beings won't necessarily seek to possess you because they don't have a necessity for your physical body. Possession typically would happen if a certain energy form is used by someone from afar to try to take control over you, right? Or if, I don't know, remains of a hyperly possessive being who died in very sorrowful ways still linger around and you stupidly open yourself to such energies, yes, that can actually cost your life. Doing spiritism and summoning spirits can actually cost your life as well because those beings are unhinged. Those that you call spirits, they don't have the limitation of a physical body. So if you open yourselves to those in a fearful way, they might perceive your fear as a kind of attack, or they might try to replicate that fear. When such an entity without a limit replicates an emotion towards you, and it can actually act as an attack, as a defensive measure against you, they don't have the limitation that your physical body has. In short, they can actually discharge a certain energy that can actually terminate your physical body, or the link that you have, or the stability of your physical body, or sever a certain link of your body, sever your physical body, your mental body, or whatever, and irreversible harm can easily be done against you. When one opens themselves to certain forces, see, a certain kind of witchcraft will require that you answer to those so-called spells, those so-called entities. A certain being under a certain kind of spell will probably hear certain sounds, they will hear probably their name being called, or they will probably see certain visuals, right? Some kind of weird beings. And if you react to those, technically, it's like you open yourself to those, right? It's like uh, going to a website that is virused, right? Only if you access that website will its viruses download into your system, right? Similarly, in a physical level, when you open yourself to such forces, you allow a certain level of control into you. You allow some energies to enter your body, and through those energies, you can be tracked and traced, for example, in real time, anywhere you are on this planet, or probably even outside of this planet in real time. Or you simply can allow certain people to cause certain damages to you from afar because they can research how your system looks. And from an occult level, if someone knows how your system is, the geometry of your system, they can cause certain attacks that will affect your system. And such an attack is harder to succeed if they do not know how your physical system functions, and also an attack isn't 100% sure to actually function against you. It might ricochet on structures or beings around you or things like that. It might affect people around you instead of you. But when an occult attack is specifically done with you, for example, they can harness some of your energy from afar, and then they can use that energy to attack you after they check the geometry, for example, of your system, of your body. They can conduct attacks against your physical body, your mental body, your emotional body, or whatever they may want to disable. They may want to use such energies just to continuously drain you of energy so that they have more vitality, or that they feel more energetic, or just to do harm upon you and constantly keep you tired, drained, busy mentally, foggy, confused. Such things are very possible. And unfortunately, you don't necessarily need to be an occult master for that. At a higher level, one has to comprehend that madness can also be induced by the sick society we live in. While technology, for example, is not an occult product, it can be used for occult reasons as well. Because you have to understand technology is the transmission of energy, right? The internet can be used for occult purposes as well. A relay antenna that sends energy waves around can actually be used on occult levels. Because occultism means an unconscious or a conscious use of energy, right? It's not just transmitting energy. You use it with a certain purpose, right? Whether you want to destroy, whether you want to elevate, or whether you want to de-elevate or keep people stuck at a certain level. There are technologies that can make people, for example, stay stuck at a certain energy level. Such technologies, for example, 5G radio waves, have been used in repeated times in cases of rebellions of the population to keep those people into hatred, rage, and anger, so that they are far easier to control, far easier to turn one against the other. There are such technologies which can enhance some people's hatred so that they become harder to control themselves and they are more open to explicit control. When someone is enraged, they lose control over their consciousness. So it is easier to turn them against one another. It is easier to end up not being able to discern in between friend or foe. Such technologies have been used by governments throughout time. Some of these events have also been recorded. They are findable. I still think they are findable on the internet. But imagine that such things can be done from an occult perspective. Yes, they can be done to make people mad at a far greater level. And unfortunately, fortunately, this sick society didn't need to do this. But if you take a look, occult structures exist in many parts of the world. If you take a look, for example, even on the Statue of Liberty, if you look at its base, there is a certain sigil which showcases the fact that it was designed with, not only physical tools but also for Masonic purposes, right? You will see some symbols about lodges and Masonry as well, Freemasonry more specifically, right? You will see that many great structures that have been built throughout the world, especially in the modern times, have more or less Masonry marks, and they are easily usable as towers that can channel a certain type of energy and keep people trapped in a certain kind of vibration. Very possible. I'm not saying it is necessarily done so, but a sick society will also need things like that because people will tend to wake up, but you need to delay that waking up, right? You need to exploit other people's feelings and emotions and constantly keep them confused and, facing all sorts of struggles, challenges, so that, they most likely sooner or later end up, hopefully for that sick society, in what one may call victimization stance or victimhood mentality, whatever you want to call it. So, hearing voices can easily be marks of a certain attack. Typically, attacks also can be felt in a certain specific way, in multiple ways. You're not going to feel necessarily good. Accidental hearings of your names can actually have multiple reasons. It can be certain defensive forces that might want to draw your attention or distract you from your certain course just because a certain delay may actually serve you better. And one has to comprehend creation itself will not ever bother itself with you. There are protective forces in the billions in the world, in this whole cosmos, and depending on someone's level of purity, someone's level of innocence, and well, let's call it sensitivity towards this world, some of these forces can more or less be enticed into actually serving that human, right? You will see that in the case of some people, some horrible events could have happened, even may have happened, and they simply somehow survived despite all the odds. Maybe they got injured, maybe they got heavily injured, but despite all the odds, and despite the fact that they probably should have perished, passed away, somehow they simply survived, right? There are numerous such cases. And well, there are such forces in the world. People end up calling them in a primitive way angels. Now, well, those are far more different than just a simple shape and a form. And they have multiple, let's say, no, I don't want to call it purposes, but whatever. So hearing voices and the such is not necessarily something bad. Hearing voices was rendered bad throughout the medieval times because in a sick society the mind becomes obsessed with thinking, overthinking, and when people only focus on that, people who are capable of making use of their intuition, especially women, for example, will be demonized more or less because the obsessive mind cannot comprehend the idea of intuition. Intuition is the same logics as the idea of the logical mind, the discriminatory mind, the discerning mind, right? It's just that logics says that you need to go through a certain number of steps, which you have to kind of know. Intuition follows similar steps, but it bypasses the intellect. It bypasses all the knowledge that you have. In case of highly intuitive people, they end up having certain ideas of things that they never knew, right? This is what usually shocks a lot of um, scientists when they have done research for 20, 30 years of their life, and highly intuitive people can end up with a conclusion or with a certain hint about something without having even read once a scientific book, especially on that field, right? This is why intuition can be very powerful and why a sick society, in its becoming a hive mind of grief, of hatred, of separation, it cannot accept that idea of intuition because intuition can guide people, intuition can unify people, intuition can give birth to people who are genuinely followed by others. And ignorance cannot exist in a world where love exists. It cannot exist in a world that can be guided by intuitive people because it cannot comprehend intuition, right? So it is indeed true that through advancing in spiritual life, one may actually start hearing voices. Such voices are of multiple types because there are all sorts of entities that will be drawn to you sooner or later, the higher your spiritual potential becomes, right? And opening, for example, or doing a lot of spiritual work on your heart chakra, for example, or on your throat chakra can actually ensure more or less that certain kind of entities will be drawn to you. And hearing voices is not necessarily something uh, common, but it can become common, more and more common, the more spiritually advanced one becomes. Hearing voices and certain sounds can also be a certain hint towards a damaged mind, people who overthink, people who end up suffering from a kind of malfunction of the mental body that leads to schizophrenia. That can actually lead, as part of the damage, it can actually lead to hearing certain voices. Yes, those voices may not necessarily be evil beings, but unfortunately, with schizophrenic people, they will function in a certain way that will kind of disallow them to be able, from being able to communicate to other people what they are hearing. Some schizophrenic people can end up being intuitive enough that they can hear certain voices and they can actually bring good ideas to the world. But those cases may actually be very rare. So hopefully this video raised a bit of awareness, and one hopefully would understand that hearing sounds and voices is the result of way more complex things than just imagination. Yes, it can be imagination on its own as well. That is why one needs to have a certain level of mental stability, because it is easy to fall victim for the idea of the mind doing things to you. Because if you imagine certain things for a while and you convince your energies, right, your life energy, that that is the way, it will constantly keep making you imagine things. And the mind can be extremely convincing. Everything that the mind shows you can be very hard be distinguished from imagination, right? That is why simple-minded people, the moment they get a good idea in their mind, they think that is the only truth, right? Because to them it is so exciting that they get a new idea. They don't have any stability that geniuses, for example, have. Because many geniuses are geniuses not because they know a lot of things, but because they usually are very intuitive, right? They don't necessarily make that much use of their mind. Yes, they know a lot of things, but at the same time, a genius knows that that information is not necessarily the alpha and omega. That is what builds a wise person, right? Wisdom means opening yourself to intuition, because just knowing things means just gathering knowledge. Knowledge doesn't necessarily mean that it's gonna save you or it's gonna help you. So this being said, hopefully this video raised a bit of awareness. You are appreciated. Take care, enjoy life, and this being said, Ferenc on board signing out.